The Toronto Maple Leafs have yet another playoff disappointment. As we talk about the Canadiens rebuild and the youth movement, how can this team avoid becoming another Toronto?
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Canadiens, where we are not here to gloat. We are not here to gloat. We are here to take very serious lessons from a massive choke job that happened up the 401. This is a very serious podcast here. We will not be laughing at the Toronto Maple Leafs. But first, we got to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day every day. As you know, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, and we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every day. My name is Laura Saab, also known as the Active Stick, and I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian, who might disagree with me when I say it's not really time to laugh about the Toronto Maple Leafs right now.
We're allowed to. I think we're owed that. That's what sports is about, right? Rivalries.
Yes.
Not wanting your rivals to do well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we're gonna get fully into what happened to the Maple Leafs, which is not only a question that has developed over the last 48 hours, but close to the last 10 years, is
Pretty
what's
much
happened to this team. It is a nightmare scenario for watching another Canadian team rebuild, is looking at that and watching the jerseys come flying over the ice and a coffee towards the end of the game just get thrown out. Don't even bother cleaning it up. Just leave it there. It's right inside the blue line. Just don't even bother cleaning it up. That we're going to close. The lights are getting shut off soon anyway. Just leave it. Pretty dire stuff. So we'll figure out how to not become this iteration of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Or any iteration of a failed rebuild, actually, because I do think that this could be considered a failed rebuild. We will get into that in just one moment. But our second segment today is dedicated to our player review of Yoel Armia. And our final segment is dedicated to a very thoughtful question from a good friend of the show who always gives us great tactical and philosophical questions to discuss about the Montreal Canadiens, which is there too much youth on this team, and how can the Canadiens sort of ensure that the energies are best spent in the right way? But let's start with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I have to give them credit. I do have to give them credit because they find a new way to do this every year. They have found brand new ways all the time. And for me, I think the biggest thing was the way they won in Florida in Game 6. And every Leafs fan was like, I know what's happening in Game 7. I know what's coming. And I said, listen, maybe. And then the Toronto Maple Leafs made me wrong.
Yeah, I think to your point, it just keeps happening, and it keeps happening in different yet familiar ways. This loss by the Leafs was I believe the tied for the largest home loss in a Game 7 in Stanley Cup playoff history. Like, it's not like they did it that's something that has happened only one other time, and yet this felt so familiar just watching that team, right?
And all it took was like 4 or 5 minutes. It wasn't even. I know you said you stepped away for 10 minutes.
I stepped away, came back. I looked at the score and like did one of those like cartoon blinks where like it makes the noise and everything, because I couldn't believe it said 3.
Yeah.
And so at some point I feel bad for Leafs fans, because the third period starts and it starts with a "Go Leafs Go" chant. They're cheering this team on, and Max Domi scores, and all of a sudden you think maybe. And then 41 seconds later, it's no. It's no longer a maybe. It is no, this is done. We're cooked. What do you think it is about this rebuild that caused it to fail, and that other teams should look at as a cautionary tale moving forward?
I think there are very many aspects of it, and I have to be very clear on this. I'm not in the locker room. I don't know, right?
Sure.
Everything that we're getting is from reporting. But also there are hot take artists that talk a lot about the Leafs, right? Like, this is like, it is one of the most followed teams in the NHL, if not the most followed team in the NHL. They like, just like here in Montreal, the sports talk is all about that hockey team day in and day out, even though they have, Major League Soccer, even though they have a women's hockey team, even though they have an AHL team right in the city. We have the same thing. But by and large, the airwaves are dominated by the NHL team that's in the city, right? And there are a lot of things that get said, and some things might be uneducated. But for me, one of the biggest things, and this goes to last night, where a lot was made of this moment where Mitch Marner turns to the bench and starts screaming his head off, and at one point says, "Wake the F up." And he was one of the only people at that point who didn't even have a shot attempt.
Yeah, that's hey, we've seen a lot of Mitch Marner as a Toronto Maple Leaf. On that roster, probably the last guy I want to be hearing from.
Right, exactly.
If I'm on that bench getting yelled at by Mitch actual Marner, no shot. I've checked out. I am in Cancun. Like, I'm
Right.
gone.
And so for me, what that screams to me is that on that team, they have allowed people to be bigger than the team, right? Everybody, or not everybody, people like that who want to win in Toronto because they want to win in Toronto and not because they want to play and win for their teammates, right? Like Marty makes such a huge deal about teams playing for each other or the players playing for each other. For me, when you have those contract disputes, you've mismanaged the cap and you've allowed players and their parents to dominate the contract disputes and to get their way in the end and be bigger than everyone else on the team. And here's the thing, like he is more talented, and I'll grant you that he's more talented than most of that team, but so is Cole Caulfield in Montreal. So is Nick Suzuki in Montreal. So is Uri Slavkovsky in Montreal. And I'm looking like right now at a strict Montreal to Toronto comparison, right? I'm not looking elsewhere. But the thing is, when you allow that to happen, when you mismanage the cap, but not only do that, allow personalities to be larger than the team itself, that starts with a dysfunction, right? So you're doing that. And at the same time, you're not worrying about goaltending. You're not worrying about defense. And by the time you turn around and you say, I'm going to fix the defense on this team, I'm going to get a goaltending solution, it is way too late because that mentality has already crept into your dressing room, and the leaders in your dressing room have that mentality. And it's just, that's going to permeate the entire lineup. And, they went and they got a character guy in John Tavares. They went and, it was such a huge deal and all of that. But what ended up happening was that me ended up winning.
Yeah. Yeah. The contracts, I think, are what is going to define this era of the Toronto Maple Leafs, in that, and it starts with Kyle Dubas being asked about, how will you get them all signed? How will you get them all under the cap? And his response was, we can and we will. Well, he was right. They could, so they did, but they shouldn't have. Like, that's what this comes down to, is that the numbers that those guys were asking for were probably right for what those kinds of players are. But it's being proven time and time again that these guys are not playoff performers. They're just not, right? Mitch Marner, 100 points in the NHL this last season, not a playoff performer. We saw it. Austin Matthews has one goal in beyond the first round in his National Hockey League career. It's not good enough. So I think, looking at it, that team should have decided that it was time to cut bait after they lost to Montreal in the bubble season. Because Marner had a no trade clause that was kicking in. And should the Canadiens get to a point where they're looking at a team like this that just can't get over the hump, and they have this sort of deadline in mind of, okay, this is when we have to make that decision, or we have to cut bait and try something else, they have to be ruthless in that. And that was the issue with the Toronto Maple Leafs. They were not ruthless in that decision making. And instead, they allowed Mitch Marner's no trade clause to kick in. They come to him this year to try to trade him to Carolina because they would have gotten Mikko Rantanen in return. Would have been an incredible trade for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And instead, they handed all of this power to this player who said, nope, I want to stay here. You're not telling me where to go. We're going to lose in the second round again. The one thing I want to talk about really briefly before we move on, the fans. I'm seeing a lot of noise that like the fans are to blame for what's happening. And this is a generational group of chokers. There's the fact that the third period of this game, they were already down 3-0 in game 7, started with a "Go Leafs Go" chant. Shut up. Those fans cared. And I think that's important when you're talking about the Canadiens, because it's a similar fan base, right? A similar rabid group of fans who want this team to win and will be very disappointed, rightfully so, when they don't.
Yes.
So like we need to keep that in mind because that's a direct parallel to this team. Right now, everything's the vibes are awesome. They're doing the wave in the Bell Center in tie games. Like it doesn't matter. We're all having a great time. Eventually that might flip. And we're going to have to deal with what does this team look like and how do they act when the lights are the brightest and when, the fans are not as warm and hospitable to the play on the ice.
And I think that's a danger that the Montreal Canadiens are already in, right? Just in terms of how passionate everyone is about this. Like they got a little bit of grace, but even when they didn't get past that first round, there were still people saying they should have gotten past that first round, even though they're way ahead in their rebuild, right? So I do think that that's definitely something to keep in mind. But my last word on this is going to be that you cannot blame the Toronto Maple Leafs fans for the way the Toronto Maple Leafs players are playing and the way that the GM manages the team and the way that the coach coaches the team and doesn't make adjustments, right? Sheldon Keefe was not, as we saw, a very adjustment prone coach, right? So you can't blame fans for that. And as much as I hate to defend Leafs fans who have been, they've been the bane of my existence for the last, I don't know, since 2021, essentially since it was 3-1. Like but the fans are never the reason you underperform, because if that was the case, why are you making so much money to push a puck around the ice?
Yeah. Like the fact that we are finding it in ourselves to defend Leafs fans in this moment or any moment for what it's worth. Come on. Like it's not a conversation here. But blaming fans is stupid. Throwing jerseys and stuff on the ice is a little foolish, but that's a strong message you're sending, at least with the jersey. Don't throw drinks and stuff. That's stupid.
Yeah. Right. Like, demand better from your team, but also like, your team should be demanding better of itself. Like they have some of the best players in the league. They have some of the best players in the league and they can't get it together. So really it's not a fan problem. Anyways, I'm getting so worked up about this. Poor Yoel Armia is now going to get the brunt of all of this passion. We're going to talk about his season and potentially who might replace him. And that's coming up next. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It is the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, I'm on a road trip, or I just need a quick protein boost, they are always my go-to. But if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are also a classic favorite. These little green wonders pack a protein punch, and whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right. As we have been doing our player season reviews, which we actually just started yesterday, we're going in alphabetical order. We're going to talk about them by the numbers, then by the vibes, and then for those who may be departing, we might talk about who might replace them, and for those who will be staying, let's talk about the outlook. But my co-host had the idea yesterday of starting with one word that describes the season in your mind, and we're not telling each other the word beforehand, so just to see what happens, just for fun. So Ian, if I ask you Yoel Armia's season in one word, what would you say?
I said back because, on yesterday's episode, we talked about Josh Anderson and I used the word renaissance, right? That he rebuilt himself as a player. The version of Yoel Armia that we saw this year was the one we had kind of gotten used to, before he had that terrible, very bad, no good season. This is the Yoel Armia he was. So Yoel Armia was back this year to me. What about you?
Mine was steady. To me this year, I felt that whenever Yoel Armia was on the ice, I felt that the Canadiens were safer. Like I felt like he could be relied upon, right? And that does have a lot to do with the chemistry that he found with his line mates and the way they work together. I think that's really, really important. But I just felt that he was a calming and steady presence for me.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I mean, if you look at a lot of the underlying numbers with Yoel Armia, they don't really jump off the page because of just how he was deployed. A lot of like his expected goal numbers aren't great. His possession numbers aren't great, part of that is because at 5-on-5, he was he started 13.5% of his shifts in the defensive zone. That's third among forwards on the Montreal Canadiens. So he was getting deployed in the defensive zone. He was like whatever the opposite of sheltered minutes are, exposed minutes, I suppose is what you would call them. That was what that's what Yoel Armia was doing. He was a plumber. They sent him out there when they had a job that needed to be done, and he would do it. He was part of that identity line, right? The fourth line became the Canadiens' identity line. It was starting games for Marty St. Louis. He would tap them for a long time. It was every night they were getting the start every night, starting lineup. I just, he's one of those players that we talk about by the numbers, by the vibes. He the numbers don't look all that great because of the role that he played. Like he is second most among Canadiens forwards in shorthanded ice time, 197 minutes. He was on their top penalty killing unit, which begs the question, can the Canadiens afford to move forward without Yoel Armia?
I think they kind of have to, unless he takes a pay cut. And
yeah, he was at 3.4 million this last year, so less than that.
Yeah. And for me, it's not a matter of who they sign. It's more a matter of whatever decision they make. It's going to take some time for them to get to the same position he was in when it comes to penalty killing, right? Whether they bring somebody up from Laval or they sign a stopgap, it's really, really, we can't expect that same level of chemistry and that penalty killing. We know Jake Evans is going to be here, but if the Canadiens will only sign him, I think, if they don't feel someone is ready to take his place, but also if he's cheaper. If not, they're going to check the open market. And you never know, somebody might be available. It couldn't even be a minor trade. It doesn't necessarily have to be a free agent signing.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that, with the argument for me in keeping Yoel Armia as opposed to trying to find another option is another option you would have to hope comes in, has good chemistry with Jake Evans, can play the penalty kill as effectively as they had, and has some of those other skills that Yoel Armia has. He's got incredible hands.
Yeah.
He's got an incredible shot when he chooses to use it. The playoffs and, the later stages of the season weren't a great glimpse of that because he was obviously playing hurt. He had an upper body injury. It was very clear that it was impacting the way he could shoot the puck and move around. So I think that's not the greatest glimpse of what that player is. And he was still a pretty effective player, despite the fact that he couldn't really shoot the puck anymore.
Absolutely.
But for me, the decision in re-signing him, first of all, it comes down to money and term. Every contract negotiation does. I'm not breaking any ground there. But it also comes down to how certain are you that another player can come in and have the same impact almost immediately. The Canadiens cannot afford to have a start like they had this last year. They did not start on time in the regular season this year, partially because of the injuries to, David Reinbacher wasn't supposed to be playing, but I'm sure mentally it played a role. And of course, to Patrick Laine, he wasn't able to play for the first, 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
Can you find a guy who can step in and immediately be Yoel Armia, or are you better off just keeping Yoel Armia? And if his number comes in, honestly, I would say anywhere south of 3, a year or 2, I'm cool, right?
Yeah,
that seems reasonable.
I think 2 years at 2 point something is definitely reasonable. What's really funny is last week I had the idea of comparing last year's underlying numbers to this year's underlying numbers. And it turned out that they were actually comparable. So I had no argument there. But that was because the first part of the season, the first 2 months of the season were just so abysmal that it kind of averaged out. So I saw no progress. So I didn't do a segment based on that. But I was just astounded at how close the numbers were. So as you said, the Canadiens cannot afford to have that start because we are expecting that, for example, Ottawa is now a team that you have to worry about making the playoffs, right? Tampa's not going to go away. Florida is definitely not going anywhere. Toronto is still good to make the playoffs. They can't get past the first round or the second round, but they're still good to make the playoffs. And then you've got teams like Detroit who hopefully have learned their lesson. Well, not good for us, but who have learned their lesson, right? And it's not just them. You've got the Flyers, you've got Columbus, you've got the other wild cards to worry about as well, right? So the Montreal Canadiens is really in their best interest to try to make their own division playoffs in the top 3, as opposed to wait it out and then make it on their last game of the year. And they really, really need to have a better start. And I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important that whoever they get, whether it's Yoel Armia or not, you're talking no more than a 5-game adjustment before they really can do Yoel Armia things.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because we know that the preseason means nothing to the Montreal Canadiens. This last preseason, I hope we never see anything like it ever again. It was the biggest waste of everyone's time. None of the player evaluations mattered. None of the games matter ever in the preseason. And it ended with, the Canadians and Senators coming to like a mutual agreement to not play any of their starters because both of them were terrified that the other guy was going to take one of their players out. It
Yeah,
was just such a
absolutely.
waste of time. I hope we don't see it again. But for all those reasons that it could happen again, you should have an option like a Yoel Armia who can just slot into that spot and not
Yeah.
have to worry about figuring out how to play with the Montreal Canadiens.
So speaking of that, we are going to talk about youth in the next segment, but I just have one question for you, Ian. Is
Yeah.
there a penalty killer in the league that you have your eye on that you wish Montreal could have?
Ooh. Yes. And I don't really know if he's penalty killing at this point, but um with Washington being eliminated, wouldn't it be fun to see Lars Eller come back and play in Montreal again? It would solve a lot of problems. He's a left shot centerman. If you're not keeping Christian Dvorak, hey, here's Lars Eller. He knows how to play in the city. Hopefully he'll have a more defined role than he did the last time he was here. That was the big issue with Lars Eller in Montreal. Play him out there. I think he can handle it. He's a rough and tumble forward. Everyone was talking about Tom Wilson playing physically in that Canadiens Capital series. Lars Eller had 5 hits in the first game.
That was Lars Eller erasure. That was.
I know, it was crazy. It was crazy. That would be a guy I'd like to see come back, and I think could play a significant role. But I don't know that he's replacing Yoel Armia's impact, right? I think that's
Right.
an addition to what's already here, not, I guess I would say he's replacing Christian Dvorak more than Yoel Armia. Different archetype, different kind of player role.
Yeah, and I know, it's the very beginning of the offseason. There are going to be a lot of decisions that get made. You never know. They might throw caution to the wind and they might bring up, Owen Beck or whatever and say, here, figure it out, kid. You've got
Yeah.
20 games. Otherwise, we're getting, you're going back down.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. All right. Speaking of Owen Beck and the youth, we got a very thoughtful question from a listener about whether the relative youth of the Montreal Canadiens as well as the Laval Rocket, in comparison to the rest of the league and also just in general objectively, is going to pose a challenge for the Habs. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. All right, let's pull up our question from our beloved Claude Sauvé, who sends us amazing segment ideas, mailbag questions. And this question is, hi guys, do you think having one of the youngest NHL teams as well as one of the youngest AHL teams is sustainable? The reason I ask is that if you consider the defense as an example and theoretically needing to roster veterans like Matheson and Carrier, the average age of the next 7 defensemen in the pecking order is 22 years old. Arguably, you can make the same case for the forward and goaltending groups. If you're compelled to play a number of your prospects in the minors beyond their best before date, do you risk stifling their development? So there was this one point, I believe, after game 3 or game 4 against Washington, somebody asked Cole Caulfield about the relative age of the power play. And he said Nick Suzuki is an old man. Nick Suzuki is 25 years old. Nick Suzuki is turning 26 in August. So if he's your old man, so, the Canadiens are a young team, but that's kind of how it's supposed to go, right? Like when you're in a rebuild, you kind of have to commit to it. You have to do the thing where you get those high draft picks. You get high draft picks from other teams or any draft picks from other teams. And then you have a bunch of young guys that you bring up, right? And then eventually you have to part with some of them. So that's how it's supposed to go. But I think the question that he asked was really, really interesting. Is it, are the Canadiens going to be compelled to leave people in Laval longer than their best, like their prime years?
I think this goes to an argument that I hear a lot of, I know we all do, of, well, they need to bring in a center to replace Christian Dvorak. Well, then you're blocking Owen Beck. Well, if Owen Beck can be blocked, he's not ready, right? If you're bringing in a defenseman to play the right side, well, that's blocking David Reinbacher and Logan Mailloux. Well, then those guys aren't ready. If the Canadiens are making that assessment that they need to have a guy there, those players are not NHL ready. And that making that determination is more of an art than a science, right? It's not this player reaches these metrics, we call him up, right? It's you want to have these players ideally up and playing with the NHL just as they're hitting that stride. But also, like, the Canadiens at this point, for the last few years, we've been focused on the development, and the development is the top number one thing. And it was like 100% of what they were doing was based on development. Results have crept in now, right? Now we are, maybe it's not 50-50. It's probably still more on the development side, but like, it's probably like 25% results and 75% development when it comes to player personnel decisions. At least maybe this year, maybe by the end of the summer, it is closer to 50-50, or maybe results have kind of moved into that next step. I was just looking over this, just because we're talking about age and how it relates to, performance, especially in the playoffs. The youngest remaining team in the playoffs is the Dallas Stars. 29.2 is their average age. That's 19th youngest in the NHL. So that is not close to being a young team. As we know, the Canadiens this year were the youngest team to ever make the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it showed, right? Like, it showed in the way they played in the regular season. It showed in the way that they played in that first round. They had some really, the way I kind of look at it is like a sugar crash, right? Like, they had some really high highs and some really just like, oh, you kind of don't belong here plays, right? That's sort of how I look at this. When it comes to bringing these guys up, I'm always worried that we're bringing them up just for the sake of doing it. They need to be ready is ultimately where I land.
Yeah. And so, like, one thing I do want to say though is that this team as a whole, their philosophy is, and I believe it was Kent Hughes himself that says it. I can't remember if it was Marty or Kent Hughes, but one of them said that I believe that even if you're a veteran player in the NHL, you can still be developing your game, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that the Canadiens are trying to unlock whatever inefficiencies there are that they can exploit, right? And if it's one player getting better at one thing, right? Like, I think they're still going to put in that effort. They're never going to just be satisfied with the status quo, even if it's a team that's always making the playoffs, right? Like the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think the Canadiens are, if there's a player in the AHL right now that isn't ready, but like 6 months from now is going to be ready and is going to be the player that they think he is, they'll trade that guy that's in his place, right?
Yep.
Get more picks, get more assets. Because like part of the thing about contending is at some point your draft position gets so low in the pecking order that it's hard to rebuild to replenish your cupboard, right?
Yeah.
So get assets, right?
You know how we
Trade
know
the
that's
guy.
true? We just saw it last year. Where's Jonathan Kovacevic right now? He's in New Jersey because the Canadiens made the determination that they wanted to play some of their younger guys and make space for them, and Jonathan Kovacevic became a roster casualty. Now, was that the right decision? I don't know. I think the Canadiens really could have used a Jonathan Kovacevic this year, but we have seen that they're able to make that decision, regardless of whether or not we agree or in the long term it turns out to be the right one. They're cognizant of that.
They did the reverse too with Justin Barron. He just wasn't cutting it, so they went out and got a veteran, right?
Exactly.
They will make those decisions on the fly. It's not their whole philosophy, but if an opportunity to get better in one position or in a position overall, in like one spot or in a position overall, if the opportunity happens, they'll do it. You know, they did the same thing with Caden Primo. They switched him out for Jakub Dobeš, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like he wasn't developing. It wasn't helping him at all. He wasn't doing what they needed him to do. So they switched him out. There's a little bit of a longer leash now, especially if they qualify him. But they made those difficult decisions when it was time to make them. So for me, I'm not too worried because I don't think that there's a scenario where the Canadiens artificially hold back somebody. I think they just make it so that person, if they're meant to be part of the contending core, and they are ready, they will make it so the person is in the lineup.
Yeah, 1,000%. And again, it's on the players. The players have to make this call. I go back to what Kent Hughes said, what Jeff Gorton said about Kirby Dach at the end of the season. Kirby Dach has a spot on this team. It's up to him where it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's up to him. They're leaving it up to the players to make these decisions. They left it up to Nick Suzuki when he said, "Don't trade my friends away." He said, "Go win games." And Nick Suzuki won games. And sure enough, we didn't trade anybody away.
Yes.
right? Like they are doing what they ought to do, which is right now put it in the hands of these guys so they can show you what they have. They can show you what they are.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna bode well with how they handle this same question over the next few years.
And I think it's just, for me, it's just always going to be an exciting time up until the point where, they're contenders and they're not winning. That's going to be a miserable time for us.
For sure.
An exciting regular season, and then the playoffs are just going to be a nightmare all over again. But hopefully they don't get to that point. Hopefully at the time that they make the playoffs, it's a team that we can believe in because of the way they've conducted themselves over the next couple of years. I've, since day one, all the decisions that I've questioned that they've made, they've turned out to be right. So at the end of the day, I'm willing to wait it out. All right.
Yep.
There's so much more to talk about all season long. We could just talk about this team all day, even though there's no games or anything going on. But it is time for our trivia because we need to give you all your time back.
Yes. Let's do our trivia from yesterday. It was Carey Price related since we talked about trading the Carey Price contract. Go check that one out if you haven't already. Carey Price got his first NHL shutout on February 11th, 2008 at home against the Philadelphia Flyers. It was in very Carey Price fashion, a 1-0 shutout win. Who scored for Montreal? Laura, do you have the answer to this one? Do you know who scored that goal?
Was it Saku?
It was not Saku. It was that era, though. It was Andrei Kostitsyn on the power play from Alex Kovalev and Andrei Markov.
That's amazing. That is an amazing trivia.
That is a goal that I can't tell you what that goal looked like, but I feel like I've seen that goal 100 times. Seems very much that era of Canadians. Very much makes sense that was a 1-0 win for Carey Price in his first NHL shutout. I don't believe anybody had that answer correct. So good luck on today's question, which is Yoel Armia based. Yoel Armia's first NHL game was on December 23rd, 2014 with the Buffalo Sabres against the Detroit Red Wings. He didn't score, but 3 former Montreal Canadiens found the score sheet in that game. Who are they? So in Yoel Armia's debut on December 23rd, 3 former Montreal Canadiens found the score sheet in that game. If you can list them for us, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode of the show.
And speaking of the next episode of the show, it is tomorrow. Why? Because we are a 5-day-a-week show all about your Canadiens every weekday. We'll be coming to you. We'll only go down to 3 days a week at some point in the summer, but it'll be very, very brief. So make sure you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. You can find us all over social media. We are Locked On Canadiens on TikTok, Locked On Canadiens on Blue Sky, Locked On Canadiens on Instagram, and lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. We love getting your emails. We love your segment ideas. We're going to probably try one out tomorrow that we got from one of you. So please make sure you're listening. You can find my co-host all over social media at Maybe It's Ian. You'll find me at The Active Sick. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow.